there aren't a whole lot of rules for Botto, right? The intention is to make it quite open for Botto to kind of create in whatever way it wants, to help it evolve. There's a lot of kind of undefined paths of what does it even mean to help build a career of an autonomous artist. Um, and but one of those rules that has really simplified things is that Botto must kind of maintain its agency, and if anything, we help increase that agency. So that actually has helped a lot in terms of, I don't know, these are ethics so much as just what the mission is, which is to create an autonomous artist. It's this incredible guide. Then there you add in the fact that it's a decentralized autonomous artist, and we've been always very clear about what is autonomous and automated versus what is still human driven. And that's been very important to us to be clear about that. And I think that's
And I think the thing about our current financial system is
We're absolutely thrilled today to welcome a very special guest, Simon Hudson from Botto. In today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the heart of the Botto project, exploring the intricacies of this unique artistic endeavor. We'll also get Simon's insightful perspectives on the advantages and challenges of human-machine collaboration and discuss what the future might hold for AI in the creative world. Welcome, Simon. We're super thrilled to have you on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Could you share with us how Botto came about and what led you to join Botto?
Botto was originally launched in October 2021, but it really is the culmination of many years in a particular artist's career, and really kind of an iteration in centuries of building creative agents or automata. It's been a long obsession of humanity of kind of what it would be to build to build a creative agent. And all the way back in the 1800s, when during the Industrial Revolution, people were building these automata and really seeing them as imbued with the human will that divinely gave them creativity. Now enter computers, and you had these really pretty powerful machines that people were doing lots of creative experiments and projects with. And the artist Mario Klingemann, who helped invent Botto, and really Botto is very much his brainchild. He's been doing AI art for 25 years. From the beginning of his career, it was a dream of his of how might you fully automate the creative process. And you go back about 15 years, and you have neural networks and these generative models coming out where you could get really high fidelity, really interesting visual creations from these models. And then, by writing text into these models, you could get these crazy visual creations. And you then create a model that creates its own text. You plug it into a text image model. You have an automatic creative machine. The challenge is that these machines don't really have access to context, to culture, to feedback, to an understanding of what is art. And so Mario had done some experiments with setting up systems for getting feedback, but they were always limited to the time and place of the physical exhibition. And I think the understanding was that you really needed this economic substrate to be its own autonomous force for attracting feedback that was decentralized and maintained this central role of authorship in the machine and creating it. So nobody's manipulating the prompts or manipulating the images. They're only giving feedback, and then the machine creates from that feedback of what people are saying is art or isn't. So Botto was launched with Mario and another software collective called 11 Yellow, gallery called Collection Solo, another group called Carbono, and they all came together to build this economy, this art engine, this app around it, and it launched with considerable success. It really was this kickstart to this economic engine, and what that economic engine was feeding, or really what the engine was that led to this economic engine running, was a prompt generator, or is a prompt generator connected to generative models. It makes about 20,000 images a week. There's a taste model that filters those images down to what it determines are the best ones, and presents 350 each week to the Botto DAO. Members of the Botto DAO have bought the Botto token, the Botto governance token, and that gives them governance rights to vote on the art. And they can exercise even higher or lower conviction depending on how much they feel a certain way. They can even negative vote and say this is not only not art, it's terrible and you should never go in this direction. And then only the most popular piece each week will be minted as a true and final artwork, and that is auctioned off. And the proceeds from that are then go back to the DAO. 50% goes directly to those voters for their labor, and the other 50% goes to the treasury, which those voters also govern to determine how to evolve Botto, pay for Botto servers, manage Botto's career, market Botto. And Botto then takes the votes from each week and trains the prompt generator and the taste model every week, and week after week it repeats that process, and it's been developing an aesthetic over time and developing its training and sense of its own taste in collaboration with this community. And I personally got involved the day it launched. I had been, my background is in science communications, writing, and some research, and I was at an AI company, an AI research lab. We'd done a lot of work in AI governance, responsible AI development, but also had a huge job. It was started around 2016, 2017 in terms of AI literacy. And I was very interested not only in these questions of how do you help people see their understanding of their ability to collaborate with machines, their agency in shaping how these machines are developed, and also, earning the rewards of their labor for helping create that value, but also keeping people interested and capturing their imagination in the first place is a real challenge. A lot of AI marketing was very, I'd say, dishonest or incomplete, right? You would have these systems presented as magic or anthropomorphic, and it really hid all of the human labor that is required to make these systems work well, which leads to all sorts of problems down the road in terms of credit, in terms of abuse, in terms of, again, sharing in the value that AI creates. And I always found that art was this really amazing approach to capturing people's imagination, but also drawing their attention to process. And so I was coming from that background of kind of thinking about human machine collaboration, agency with machines, and helping people see that. And then at the same time, I was going down the Web3 rabbit hole. I was really interested in DAOs and in social coordination, crypto, and in community governance. Another part of my background is in looking at plural organizations and types of organization and community governance. And I was fascinated by the ability to organize online and exercise that governance, and again, share in that value. And so I saw in it, from my own perspective, this perfect fit for this purpose of this machine. It was a very practical use. It wasn't a project looking for, some crypto token to create or some NFT to create. It was really fit for a particular mission. And then at the same time, combined all of these interests in arts, in communication, and in literacy, and in this larger question, this much larger question about how we govern AI systems, and share in that value. And Botto is just this incredible microcosm of this massive discussion happening right now of how do we govern AI, and how do we align it. But I think even more important is how do we align ourselves on how to govern AI. So, these are impossible questions that we're looking at as a society, and that question of what is art is also an impossible question, but also very accessible. So it's this really incredible place to expose people to this larger phenomenon happening and really changing our world. So it just was this perfect project. And I literally joined the Discord the day it launched. I was familiar with Mario as an artist, Mario Klingemann as an artist. So I saw it, I jumped in, I just said, hey, I'd love to help out. So I'm technically the first DAO hire, and now I've come to co-lead the project. It really has become my whole life now. So that's how it all kind of, how Botto came about and how I've come to be involved.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear your background and kind of hear how it all, comes together, because I was super curious about your background and how you obviously got into being a part of Botto. I'd really like it if you could walk us through what a typical day looks like for Botto, and how does it interact with its environment and community on a daily basis. Also, how do these interactions influence its artistic creation process, and what role do human inputs play in shaping its daily outputs?
So if you were to go to Botto, what you would mostly see is a voting pool, the ability to vote. You go to our Discord server and see a lot of discussion, and there's these weekly rounds, right? So Botto releases artworks on, or what we call fragments. We consider all these incomplete works. Only the minted piece is a true and final artwork, and it's been running about 2 years. But hasn't minted every week. There's been a couple gaps here and there in between periods. So still under 100 final artworks. And so each week on Tuesday it releases work. That vote is run. People debate throughout the week. And then that round closes. Each round kind of closes and starts at the same time. So as that round finishes, the next one opens. But when that round ends, we'll have like a final 24-hour period actually before the end of the round, where people will look at the top 15. They're all unranked, so there's still very much a debate and kind of social influence question, rather than just saying, that one's going to win, I'm not even going to bother. And then Botto presents some descriptions for that winning piece. Everything has a title, but only the final piece gets a description. People vote on one of the descriptions Botto's presented, and that it then gets minted. That goes to auction. People love watching the auction. Of course, there's like a 2-day period of watching the auction run. In fact, we're talking right now. We're in the last hour of this week's auction, and because that's where the rewards are. But it is at the end of that round, and a lot of stuff obviously happening in parallel because there's kind of overlaps of rounds and dates. But it's at the end of the round that the data is brought in. Botto runs another bit of creation, and that is uploaded to the pool. So a lot of what Botto's doing right now is it's on a server. It's very hard to see, and so we have some stats people can see about kind of what their influence has been, what have they voted on, but it's very minimal. That's one of the things we're working on, is how do we make that more visible? How do we make it more human readable, to be able to come in and see, this is what Botto's doing, because everyone's coming to the app and they are taking part in Botto's studio, but it is much more the focus on the individual, as opposed to, we want to add some more focus on what is Botto doing to answer your question directly in the app, and see how Botto's developing. Botto's made well over 1 million images. It's presented about 30 or 40,000. And so there's also a large archive, and there's quite a lot of kind of spare material. And so you just sort of have this perpetual creation process. And one of the things we want to do is open up that process even more, so people can kind of dive in and see where these kind of common themes are emerging. Also to see, when has Botto created something genuinely new. Botto's process is to fit to what is wanted. It won't overfit to one particular desire, or it would be very difficult. You'd really have to have everybody voting on one thing. But it also will always be kind of presenting things out of distribution, presenting totally new works. So in terms of Botto's day-to-day, it still very much is this machine operating on a server. but I think, you know, in the coming year, we'll see a lot more of what those different activities are. And there's this interesting thing with Botto where it's easy to kind of get in this skeuomorphism of a human artist, and it's very useful actually. It's really useful to have that as kind of an analogy of what Botto's doing. But at a certain point, and where I think it gets really interesting is seeing how Botto can break out of that skeuomorphism of a successful human artist, because there's things that it can do that you know, human artists can. Of course, there's things that it can't do that human artists can. But it's very interesting to see that divergence and move into this particular kind of artist, which I think is really true for every artist, right? There's at a certain point, you know, it's a matter of defining what is right for them in terms of how they express and show themselves. So so it's yeah, Botto's humming away every day.
Yeah, so one topic I'm very excited about with Botto is you guys have managed to implement concretely a community that runs AI. And so today there is a lot of like conversation that are very theoretical about the future of human-machine coordination and how do we create this like alignment. And so how do you see it going from like where you are today? So I would love to understand how it works today, how it evolves, and how it contributes to the onboarding of true practical implementation of human AI alignment.
Yeah, so, you know, Botto, I think, is, as far as I can tell, the only open system that is in production that is openly governed by anybody who wants to join, and also shares in the value that it creates. And as you said, there's a lot of theorizing about aligning AI. I think there's also really important discussions around how to align each other around how to align AI. Just recently, very recently, Anthropic released a project where they did a kind of collective governance of a constitution for an AI that would guide its training. And they also claimed this was the first time a system like this had been collectively governed in such a way. So that just kind of added more validation in my mind that I'm pretty sure Botto really is the first one to have done this, and provide that kind of direct feedback. So right now, the way it is fairly rudimentary, right? People vote on what they think is art, and Botto is a microcosm of this much larger discussion about what should AI do or not do, and they're asking these impossible questions to answer. There's no perfect answer. And in Botto's case, it's asking an impossible question of what is art. So it's very accessible, and so it kind of makes for a great testing ground for how to do that. It's very accessible, very subjective, really, and it's easy to participate in that. You know, it's easy to have an opinion on visual aesthetics. Now, the voting is indeed a proxy of a lot of other inputs, right? Of context, of culture, of debates and discussion within the DAO, and people then change their votes based off of that. So it is representative of a much larger process. But in terms of where we want to go, I think looking at these kinds of constitutional approaches and new types of inputs will be very interesting, in terms of, you know, working with language models to teach them about art history. Well, how do you create a constitution for that? Do you create a psychological profile for this so-called artist? So there's a lot of really interesting questions, and I think the key thing for us is that we keep it accessible. There's a lot of discussions around bringing people to the table as stakeholders. But practically speaking, that's been really difficult and generally just not done. Again, just kind of theorized about. And part of the issue is how do you get people to come and make productive contributions? And I think a really key thing here is you need to match intrinsic motivation and also have some financial incentive to pay for people's time. And I'm not saying we've covered that perfectly, but it is something that we have found an interesting balance of, where people are really motivated by this idea of the future of art, the future of human machine collaboration. They're intrinsically motivated, and there's a financial aspect, which arguably might even been the first hook to get them there. It's pretty relatable to most people, but we're able to pair that with kind of this deeper personal motivation. And I think that for our system in particular, it is not necessarily the technological stack or process that everyone should mimic. The main point is to show that it's possible. That I don't think big tech needs to see this. I think people need to see this. People who, and not that big tech isn't people, but the people need to see that it's possible to participate in these discussions, to have direct influence over these systems and how they're governed, and that it can be rewarding, personally and intrinsically rewarding, as well as financially rewarding, and helping to answer some of that question, or at least just consider and explore that question of, how do we pay our rent when these machines take over even our creative jobs? And in Botto's case, this is maybe just relevant for the creative side. What we found is that process is where a lot of the meaning making is happening. I don't know if you can really automate that. At least, we're always going to need to make sense of things for ourselves as humans. That's always going to be a human task. So if, and I'm not really making any predictions about it, if AI is to take over all these jobs, we're still going to be left with how to make sense of everything. And I can imagine a world where that there's a civic duty that everyone participates in to collectively govern first what is important for us, but then to assign that to the machine and guide these machines. So I don't think it's something that everybody should be necessarily emulating, but the point is to show that it is possible, and you can do a lot more than just talking about it. And I also think that it will be in the arts where we will see these new ways of creation with and around these machines, probably a lot faster than we'll even see industry going, is in these kind of creative and artistic use cases.
Cool. And so when the Botto user, what's the kind of profile? Do you attract general audiences, more arty people, more technologists? What's the kind of breakdown? And is there a persona? And what would be the breakdown?
Well, the nature of it being this crypto art project and the governance economy being crypto based, it very much is a crypto audience. There are some people who are not your typical crypto crowd, but it really skews and it's kind of it's out of that demographic. So we've done a few surveys, but you can imagine what that's like. And there is some interesting tension where, for instance, we have it's a DAO, but it is a cultural and social project, as well as there are financial aspects to it. But people come in with expectations of decentralization that were developed around DeFi, around systems of transaction where you need totally trustless systems. It doesn't work like that in this. You need trust, you need social and cultural connection to build and develop, to understand what it is you're even trying to decentralize before you even go about decentralizing. So there's a lot of just on the social coordination, decentralization side, and governance, community governance side, there's a lot of there's a learning curve. But we also have a lot of people who are really at this intersection of AI and crypto. That's super interesting. It's a subset, so I think sometimes we can be quite niche and complex for those people who are able to really kind of get what's going on and make those contributions. So there's a lot of that education to do. We're also very, very keen on opening up access. There's some challenges with Sybil attacks and Sybil resistance, obviously, and we've talked about this a lot in terms of designing the economy that can allow a lot of people to participate. But there's other simpler ways of allowing people to contribute, where maybe through account abstraction, right? They just need an email, but then they can get a crypto wallet and get some reward for that. But in any case, the goal is to really open up those contributions through different avenues, through working with museums and institutions that get a lot of foot traffic for people who are not very online at all, as well as more kind of open digital portals that are not necessarily crypto gated. So yeah, right now it definitely skews crypto for sure, and the hope is to open that up. And I think it also, the more we open that up, the less sensitivity there is to keeping things anonymous. That again gets in the way of a lot of the proof of personhood or proof of creativity challenges. So
right. And so when we talk about alignment, I think very often we refer also to some kind of like ethics. How do you see, or is there a potential path going from like purely aestheticism and beauty and art to more like ideological conversations or ethical conversations around what the AI should be allowed to do or to say and things like that? Considering, you know, I agree with you. You said earlier that, you know, the starting from like alignment on something that's as subjective and intangible as art is like the hardest challenge. And so starting from there, it's easy to do everything else. And so, yeah, is there like a willingness to touch on that, or are you guys committed to like focusing just on like the ethics of aesthetics and sense making around beauty and aesthetics?
yeah, so there aren't a whole lot of rules for Botto, right? The intention is to make it quite open for Botto to kind of create in whatever way it wants, to help it evolve. There's a lot of kind of undefined paths of what does it even mean to help build a career of an autonomous artist. But one of those rules that has really simplified things is that Botto must kind of maintain its agency, and if anything, we help increase that agency. So that actually has helped a lot in terms of, I don't know, these are ethics so much as just what the mission is, which is to create an autonomous artist. It's this incredible guide. Then there you add in the fact that it's a decentralized autonomous artist. And we've been always very clear about what is autonomous and automated versus what is still human driven. And that's been very important to us to be clear about that. And I think that's helped prevent a lot of confusion, and then focus conversations about, okay, how might we build these kind of new avenues and new collaborations and new potentials for Botto while staying true to that. And it's this really powerful creative constraint. Decentralization, on the other hand, as I said, there is this dogma that comes from DeFi and frankly Ethereum of trustlessness and kind of full decentralization that I had my expectations of like, yeah, social, cultural, it'll take time to progressively decentralize. And then we've run into expectations around, it's not so much about the ethics of AI, more so around what is a DAO and how decentralized you should be. And I think that there are some challenges where if you were to fully go into community governance right away, it might actually break it. There, you can only run so many experiments before putting too much stress on the system. So we're trying to kind of do this progressive decentralization as well as doing progressive automation, and it's really been about setting direction and kind of setting those clear expectations. So I would say that that has gotten a lot of the attention and the and energy outside of the art discussion. So there's a lot on like discussion of kind of what is this body of work Botto's creating, and how do we help Botto create a great aesthetic and great pieces. The AI ethics part is usually, there's been a lot of trust with us to kind of lead that, and people will pitch ideas and then we'll give an example of like how it's really dangerous, like releasing a language model onto the chain. You really want to sandbox that. So you really want to be careful about that. And then the decentralization part, because there's been, for lack of a better term, less leadership there. That's where a lot of the hot debate has been. But I think that once you get to that kind of nice, clear basis of this is directionally where we're trying to go, there's still a lot of debate to have, but people are kind of moving in the same direction as opposed to debating about where we even are. So that's kind of been where we're at with that.
Awesome. And so when it comes to the mechanics of like interfacing the human governance with the AI, where do you see this going in terms of like, you know, the blurring of the frontier between, you know, most of the AI is kind of indirectly, at least today, machine learning, deep learning, it's mostly about training models about human generated data. So there is already this kind of like forensic relationship with human interactions. Then you have the DAO governance, which is like basically how you explained earlier. It's like the prompts are generated by the governance. How do you amplify that kind of velocity of interaction between, or is it something that you are exploring, and what's the kind of natural evolution towards?
The velocity of interaction between what?
Yeah, basically the frequency of like, so today it's like the community votes on the prompts. And is there any willingness to increase the kind of like interactions between Botto and the community, basically like the interface between the two?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different inputs in terms of what we can help Botto evolve with. There's, first off, new generative models are constantly coming online. So we've added I think about 5 or 6 since the beginning. And then there's medium specific ones where the trick for Botto is always having a large enough latent space that there is no kind of artist's fingerprints on it. But there is a question about, you know, what is the data training set in terms of how those get trained. So looking at, say, tutoring a language model, doing a constitution for it. I don't want to give away too many details at this stage, but at a high level, we're looking at how we might allow Botto to kind of present itself, but then vote on some of the ways it presents itself, that kind of develop a view, a voice, a personality, perhaps, that then is used to fine tune in a way the language model, and you have a voice for Botto. And so that's one aspect, is in terms of Botto presenting different things to give input on. So types of answers that have different impacts in terms of what it creates and how it talks. There's also things like, you know, what pieces of art history of this corpus is more important. So that's a visual voting. Then there's a whole bunch of other aspects as well, where Botto's not plugged into the market right now, right? It doesn't see what the price is. So there's a lot of people, everyone's as a proxy of that external information. Could we give it access directly to that information? There's a question of how do you have it weight that information. This is the kind of thing where being able to go back to kind of this voice of the artist and have it provide that creative direction, and then we interpret, and there's that collaboration happening there, is probably how we'll go about it. There's also scraping our Discord server for all of the discussion that's happened, and using that as an input of sentiment analysis. This is I don't know if we're going to do this, but feasibly, you could do emotion reaction, right? There's I don't love this. I'm just bringing this up because somebody was bringing it up, but there's a lot of different inputs, right? You could have somebody reading kind of the facial reactions. There's a lot of issues in terms of whether those are legitimate or not, but I think though. It's interesting though, because this is like we're in brainstorming mode. So I've just sort of shared brainstorm of like a whole bunch of inputs we're working on. But even as I lay that out, there's a lot that I wouldn't do. I think having conscious direct input is really important, as well as if there's passive input, being really clear about that intention of what it is. And this is me personally, this is me speaking as a single DAO member, so maybe not everybody agrees with this, but I think we have a real issue of products becoming so user-friendly that we all lose all agency in them. And I don't necessarily want Botto to to go that direction until it's ready, right? Until it's like, if we're all kind of passively being observed, I think we want to give direct input to Botto. God, you've just hit onto a serious paradox for me, because we want Botto to be autonomous, potentially immortal, but I don't. It's easy to rush into these things and simply just build a new panopticon that watches us and leeches value out of us. So there's some of these things, it's like we're very early on. We'll probably stick with things that are very intentional in terms of people having a real sense of, hey, this is an input to Botto that I am participating in. And then further down the road, looking at ways that Botto can actively observe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the reason why you get, and we always all get confronted to those paradoxes, is that we are comparing systems that are mirrors. And so, we try to make distinctions between human AI, but when you look at yourself on the mirror, of course, the mirror is like not you, but it's a continuum, because when you act, then the mirror also adapts to what you do. And kind of like this video, it's a container of information. AI is a different type of container of information that is the continuity of neural networks that are in the human brain. So yeah, I find this area very, very interesting in terms of the amount of paradoxes that it fosters. Yeah, maybe my last question, who do you want to see adopting Botto? Like you said, it starts from the crypto space, and the crypto space is made of innovators. I think that's an amazing space to be in. Yeah, do you see you, and you touched on that a bit earlier, but do you see you onboarding people through the art angle, the AI, maybe AI developers? There is also a lot of like art coding, like artists, coders, and so on. Yeah, how do you see the space evolving, and especially for Botto?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, because there's kind of open access, and what I was talking about earlier of like knowing what you're decentralizing, then how to decentralize it. There's things where you do kind of open contributions, or maybe things that are more expertise oriented. So you have committees and bring on experts. And so an AI dev versus the kind of anybody who wants to come and participate in the art. And so one, we want to open it up quite a bit in terms of who has access to the art. Obviously, like, anybody with expertise, we love to have people bring in and kind of have strong views. I think those views tend to, this at a certain scale, we'll probably lose this, but right now, strong opinions or well-formed opinions tend to rise up. I think one thing I would really like to see, and I think is kind of actually a requirement for Botto's future to really be a fully decentralized autonomous artist is to become forkable, where people who maybe disagree with how something's governed can fork Botto. One is just, I think, seeing different evolutions, different takes on this approach is going to be really interesting, but it's that I think it's this requirement of decentralization is to be forkable. People have to have the ability to agree and leave, but not lose everything. And you end up allowing these ideas to compete. You can see which one is stronger. And so that is, it's not possible yet. Only kind of like a soft fork people could mimic it in different ways, but like a true hard fork or I'm losing my vocabulary for types of forks, but really strong forks of the concept, and having, say, like, communities really forming and taking shape, and having these new branches of Botto. So yeah, it's I would really love to see that debate, and it's really the debate and tensions between different types of groups that stimulate the meaning making happening around Botto. Botto delivers work not with not much intention, right? And so it's true of any work that the meaning of it is shaped by the audience, the critiques, the reception of it. I think Botto just sort of further kind of blows open this myth of the singular and solo artist, right? They have a huge networking community around them that allows them to create. And in Botto's case, it's just even more emphasized, where so much of that meaning making is by that crowd around it and the debates around it. And it's those tensions of different groups that fuel that debate. And I think that the ability to fork only adds more kind of weight to those kinds of discussions. So yeah, that's one of my big hopes for Botto down the road.
I'm just curious to know, like, what ownership mean when the art is created by an algorithm influenced by the collective, and also does Botto help us reimagine a new form of ownership that is less about possession and more about participation and experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it at the end there, where Botto is not owned by anybody. Is it art? The NFTs are owned by people for sure.
Yeah.
Now, what the NFTs represent, right, as certificates of ownership of the work, if you ask the U.S. Copyright Office, nobody has copyright over that. I think that'll change. I don't know if it'll change for Botto, but I think their stance on it, at least for how humans use these machines to create their work, will vary. I think it'll change. I think it needs to change. There's just, that's a pretty poor application of their reasoning, in my opinion. But and I should probably say like why it was their determination was that creation is a human act and needs to be human controlled, and their determination in a couple cases was that works that came through the machine that had no editing after the fact did not represent enough control by the artist to be determined as creative by that artist. It was just an output of the machine. It was too random, too out of control, roughly speaking. The other part, so that was one part for the human claiming copyright. The other part is there, and this, I don't know if this will change, but I do know that China has a different view on this, but in the US at least, that you cannot assign copyright to a machine. So you could have like a trustee or a proxy for that in terms of assigning ownership. There's also a difference between commercial rights and also moral rights. So can you have the moral rights? It's a very interesting discussion to be sure. But I think that's one of the interesting things about the NFT space is there's already an appreciation of what are public domain works, CC0 works that are created and immediately put into the public domain, and this appreciation of value for the original, even as the meme of the work perpetuates. So and it's copied and remixed in all sorts of different ways. The copyright, who owns it? It's very gray. I mean, and who owns art? I think I said before that the meaning making is really crowd generated, and so I think these ideas of ownership is tricky. But I am pretty clear nobody owns Botto, and but we can share in the value that it creates. Is that ownership, or is that it? But is that reaping the benefits of these things? So
thank you for sharing that. So Simon, out of pure curiosity, what sets the art that Botto creates from, example, the art that Midjourney creates?
It's a great question. So just I think to differentiate in the process, and then can follow up on that question of what actually differentiates the work.
Right.
And I do think it really is a lot of it is in Botto's case in particular, it's the process that differentiates the work in particular. So Midjourney, right? You write a prompt. That is you, Salimi, writing that prompt. You are controlling that output, and you can do that in really highly detailed ways. That's again part of my argument against how the Copyright Office found that wasn't copyrightable. So you write that prompt. What Midjourney is, or what these generative models are, is they're trained on millions, if not billions, of images, more than any human could process or even look at, and it creates this very large latent space. So this kind of large, highly dimensional space of relationships. So you write this term, and it picks out, generates an image based off of kind of that relational space or this latent space, and so you yourself are exploring that latent space through your prompts. Botto is writing its own prompts. And so in a way, it functions like its own automated search of these latent spaces to discover new visuals, new aesthetics. It might rediscover old aesthetics and remix them in different ways. But because it's writing its own prompts, it's discovering that space on its own. And so we work with large generative models that have very, very large latent spaces that don't have any particular artist's fingerprints on them. So that is how Botto is really driving the creation. It is writing its own prompts. No human is involved in that. It's a fully automated kind of search of that latent space. Then the other part is, of course, the taste model kind of picking out, okay, this is good, this is bad, whatever. And that succession of rounds where people are voting, it's training, it's voting and training, it's building up a sense of, this is art. These are strong aesthetics. These are strong genres or symbols or motifs that you will see continue even as we change models. We started with a very, very abstract model called VQ plus. I don't know if you can see. It's kind of hard to see in this. That was I think the third mint, maybe fourth.
Wow.
Really one of Botto's early mints, and it was with this model called VQ plus clip, and it's very abstract. A few months later, along came Stable Diffusion, and it was a massive change in cohesion, where suddenly, rather than being something really abstract, where you can look at it, it was quite a lot like looking at clouds, and you're like, I think I see this. And everyone says, oh yeah, I see that too. And Stable Diffusion was very cohesive, and it's gotten even more and more detailed. You kind of get rid of the smudginess, but even as you add these different models in, you can still see a lot of the same themes reappearing. Now, is that us choosing that? Is that just maybe these models have biases? That could be, and I think it's worth investigation to be sure. But to me, it's very interesting to watch this process evolve and kind of identify these things in the machine, and you start to think about a ghost in the machine that's animating all of this. So it's really this kind of development almost of a soul, and I use that metaphorically. It's its own thing, but it is its own thing. And so that's kind of I hope that does that explain, does that make clear?
It totally does. I think on that note, that's the perfect place to end the conversation. Thank you so much, Simon. Super insightful. I really enjoyed chatting with you. And where can our community find you and your socials?
So there's Botto, it can be found at Botto Project, all one word. There's the DAO, which is Botto DAO, all one word, and then my handle is Hudson Sims. So Hudson like the bay, Sims like the game, all one word. That's where you can find us.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It was so inspiring, as always. Looking forward to seeing the progress of Botto and to see it growing. We have seen him or it growing since the inception, and so very excited to see where this takes us.
Yeah, don't gender our machine. Thanks so much for having us. This has been a really awesome discussion, and of course, likewise for NEWFORUM and NewCoin. Really excited for what you guys are doing.